Apologize that we are having a little bit of technical difficulties on the physical side here in the room, so we don't have a camera today. But thank you all for those who are here in person with the crazy weather, and thank you for those who are joining online. We have a very exciting speaker today, Mike Landeck, who has many years of cyber experience, including red teaming, pen testing, and now moving into risk assessments and consulting. So very broad range of experiences from one person, and he's here to share that with us today. Um, so yeah, for those who are in person who braved the weather, you have the opportunity to ask him some questions afterwards. So please do take advantage of that. Um, and yeah, I do want to thank all those who showed up to support our CSAF presentation demo team. They did a fantastic job presenting a IP camera hacking demonstration at CSAF that had a lot of, I saw some of the pictures that looked really, really cool. I think I walked over and I saw like 8 people crowding you guys. So that must have been exciting. Oh, fantastic. But yeah, so if you have any questions about that and what they did, if you weren't able to make the Friday workshop to kind of get a up close and personal view of that, we have two of our presenters here today, and I'm sure they would love to rattle your ear off about that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to our speaker, Mike. Again, sorry that we don't have our camera, but do listen in because this is very valuable stuff that you're about to hear. So, Mike.
Hey, thank you very much. So those who are here, thank you for coming in the rain. I've spoken at dozens of different universities in lots of different states, and Cal Poly Pomona is my favorite because the students show up. I've spoken here on Friday nights and students show up. I'm speaking here in a rainstorm and you guys show up. And Cal Poly Pomona students are just the most dedicated to professional growth I've ever worked with. So my bio, this is today. My old bio talked about all my years of experience. I hacked my first computer in the late 70s before most of your parents were born. I've got CVs. My name I've spoken at DEF CON. I've taught at B-Sides Las Vegas. I've consulted to a bunch of funny agencies. But I've switched all that. I no longer write pen testing and hacking tools. I no longer am involved in product security. I've really shifted my focus now. I work part-time. I had a major injury 2 years ago, which kind of took me out of the industry for a few years. But I've come back now, and it really isn't about hacking stuff. It's about how you communicate what you hack. Like for example, January of 2003, I was here, classroom right across there, and I taught wireless pen testing, and we hacked access points, we hacked cameras, we had pizza, and it was a ton of fun. We hacked everything, and I loved it. And when I left, we all had a good time, but I don't think anyone there left and got a job in wireless pen testing. I don't think they put on their resume. I don't think it did anything for their careers whatsoever, except we had a fun night with pizza and hacking. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as far as students go, it wasn't useful except a good time. So what I'm doing now is I've moved my focus from how to hack stuff to really how to communicate the risk behind what you hack. And then the bottom line there on my slide, it says it all. You can find a major defect in a product or something, but if you can't communicate it clearly to the people who are ultimately accountable for it, it doesn't do anyone any good. So that's the focus. That's my shift. And I show this slide a lot when I speak to young people. I was at Berkeley a long time ago before you were born, but I had two professors who were really influential on me. And Professor Shapiro said something that's really guided my career. And he said, because of the way technology cycles, he said, many of you will find yourself at the height of your field. You'll be the best in the industry. Everyone will love you. And he said, at that point, start looking for a new job because in 3 to 4 years, you'll be unemployable. If you don't keep your skills up, eventually they'll go away. And I was thinking how interesting that is because when I was here and taught Wi-Fi pen testing, we were hacking a WPA that's outdated. Everything I taught is no longer relevant. Risk assessment will never go away. There'll always be something of value. There'll always be threats to it. There'll always be probabilities will be hacked, and there'll always be an outcome for that. The second thing I learned from Professor Mester was You learn the fundamentals early, learn them well, and you'll never be outdated. And there's nothing more fundamental than assessing risk in cybersecurity. It doesn't matter what you're hacking, be it a quantum computer or an old Apple II, a risk assessment is a risk assessment. That's why I'm focusing on risk assessment today. This is my obligatory boring slide. I have to tell you what it is. So a risk assessment really is there's some kind of fight. You have something of value. There's threats to that thing of value. And how big a threat and how bad it hurts are the risk assessments. So you hear it a lot, risk, it equals, actually it says threat risk equals, it's probability times impact. You've got something of value. How likely is it something bad will happen? And when something bad happens, how much does it hurt? And that's really what a risk assessment does. And the reason you do it is there's only two reasons to do it. One, there's the requirement, governance. Either you work for a company that says you have to, or you work for a government that says you have to, or there's a law that says you have to. If you have credit card data, PCI says you have to. If you have patient health information, HIPAA says you have to. If you work for Microsoft, their internal governance says you have to. So there'll always be a reason you have to. And the other reason, which is they're both equally valuable, the other reason you do one is you want to understand the risk. Your security team has found a problem, and the business says, and I'm jumping ahead, but the business says, so what? You found something, why do I care? And that's the risk assessment. So when you do it, there's, straight out of the textbook, if there's a major change to your code, a major change to your infrastructure, a major change to your process, you do one. And then most frameworks run annually. And I added the last one myself, and that's, as a security analyst, whenever you're struggling to make a decision, you just do one. So this is a real life example, and I've oversimplified this, but this is really what I did for a living. So you're a product security analyst, okay? And you're asked, your company is releasing a product, and that product is predicted of a profit of $100 million the first year. So you release it in January, by December 31st, you've made $100 million of profit. That's a big deal. That moves your stock, everyone gets rich. Now, very late, very much towards the right, very late in the life cycle, the product security team found an exploitable vulnerability, and they wanted to delay the product. So you've got this $100 million profit, and you got the security team saying, wait, we can pop a shell. Now, the analysis says the projected loss from that finding, if you release the product between fines, penalties, and brand damage, is about $300,000. And this is an example you'll have if you go into product security or any kind of software security assurance. This is the kind of scenario you'll have. I made it a little exaggerated here. But for most of us, this is a no-brainer. Why would you lose 100 million to save 300,000? That's not how product security works, unfortunately. You have to back yourself up. And this is what I call the so what perspective. Throughout your career, you'll always have opportunities. It's not, everyone talks about you get one shot, you don't. You get, every time you go to work, you have an opportunity to impress people, do the right thing, show your competence. And when you become a security analyst, there'll be times when you have to explain your findings. And this is my little example here. It's what I call a make or break career opportunity. The CEO of the company calls you in and says, tell me why I should give up $100,000 profit. Okay, that's a big deal. There's really four ways to do this, and I have them ranked from bad to best, and we're gonna deep dive into each one of these. But if you say you should give up $100 million because the pen tester says so, you're not going to go anywhere. He's going to kick you out of his office. If you reference an industry standard, if you say OWASP says it's the right thing to do, or if you say ISACA says it's the right thing to do, you're a little better off, right? At least you know what you're talking about. Then if you go up to your governance, there's regulatory frameworks or internal governance. If you say our internal policy says we're not supposed to, at that point, you're doing the right thing. You've given them information, you've said the governance, but you're kind of missing the point. As a security analyst, your job is to represent the business. If you've got governance that's costing your company $100 million, it's your job to start looking at the governance and start pushing to get some changes there. And the last one is qualitative. If because everything, the $100 million profit and the $300,000 impact isn't binary. It's not black and white. It's not a threshold. There's a big continuum. And quantitative, and I'm going to deepen this there, but quantitative analysis talks about probabilities. I'm going to save that. I've got a slide that'll help you understand that better. So when you work in product security and the kind of corporate security, this is typically what you'll get. I use SQL injection here because it's kind of an easy one to work with. But you'll get a report, and the first one says severity is critical. And your first job is to say, why is it critical? Like, is it, oftentimes the tools will have default in the automated tools we have. It's called severity inflation, where they'll make things sound worse. The tool sounds better. So your first job here is to ask about severity. The second thing you see here is confidence. Often that's low, medium, high. The best is confirmed. That means your pen test team has some kind of screen capture that shows they successfully exploit it, and that's what you care. That's the best. And the next thing is the next thing we see here is some kind of regulatory reference. Most often that'll be a CWE, which stands for Common Weakness Enumeration. And it's just a big list of things that come straight from the federal government from NIST. That's a big list of things that NIST says they think are problems. So instead of it being Mike Landeck thinks you've got a weakness, it's the federal government thinks you have a weakness. The next thing you see on these reports almost always is some kind of reference to an industry standard. Here it's OWASP. OWASP isn't a law. There's no requirement for OWASP. But if you can tie it to OWASP, saying OWASP thinks this is bad, then you're okay. And the last thing is the risk rating. And sometimes it's purely subjective. Sometimes it's analysis. Sometimes it's productive. In this case, you'll see it's a CVSS, and we're gonna dive into all these. And here it says it's a 9.1 out of 10, which actually is critical. So this one makes sense. And let me keep going because this may not make a lot of sense to you yet. So this slide shows we're going to look at three different ways to look at things. There's what's called the risk matrix, which is just one on the y-axis. It's how bad things are, and on the x-axis it's how likely it is. And if you go in the middle, you can find it, and that's how most industries work. On the right is you'll see a loss exceedance curve I'll talk about. In the bottom, you'll see a calculator. So this is what most of you will see, and this is a very common one, but we talk about risk equals likelihood times impact, or probability times impact. So if you look at this, and it's highly likely something minor will happen, the industry says it's a medium. I kind of disagree with that, because if it's highly likely something bad will happen and that bad thing's irrelevant, is it really a medium risk? Then if you have something significant that's likely to happen, it's a medium high. And this is just the industry standard. And if you, in this case, for our example, it said it was possible and it's significant, that means a medium high. And this one comes from NIST, and NIST is sponsored by the federal government through MITRE. And this is a calculator where you go through and you punch everything in, and it gives you a number between 1 and 10 that says, critical, bad, good. And I'm gonna cover this more in a minute. And this one we're not going to talk a lot about today, but it's probably the most important. This is quantitative cyber risk. And if you look here, if you can see the slide, there's about a 90% chance something bad will happen that'll cost you $75,000. And if you go down towards the bottom right, there's about a 10% chance something that'll happen that'll cost about $1 million. So if you have a finding and you want to know, you're trying to understand if you should get it fixed. So in the case of the $100 million profit, $300,000, if you look at the chart, it's a no-brainer to fix it. If in this case, if you've got something that's going to make you $100 million and it's going to cost you $1 million to fix it, there's only a 10% chance fixing it will even matter. So this is what's called the loss exceedance curve. And you look at this to figure out how to prioritize remediation. Remediation means fixing things. So when you look at this, so quantitative risk assessment, that's something called FAIR, Factor Analysis of Information Risk. And I encourage you all to Google that later, sometime over your spring break. Take a look at FAIR, because that's going to be that'll be very, very valuable in your career going forward. For regulatory risk, you've got the CVSS system, which is good. Also, if you're going into pen testing or any kind of assurance, that's going to be super important to you. And you have NIST 830, which is the federal government standards. Then under industry standard, you've got things like, these are much less important to you. These tend to be very siloed into the industry, and you've got traditional risk matrix, scenario-based assessments. These are things that will be, you kind of learn on the job. They're very on the job training. But I want to walk through a couple of examples with you. I got a risk matrix example and a CVSS example. So this is an example for SQL injection. I know SQL injection was actually discovered in 1999, and it's still here today. Before I left my industry 2 years ago, we were still finding SQL injection. Who here knows what SQL injection is, or SQL injection? Okay. SQL injection is, if I'm a bad actor, I can basically inject SQL code. If I have a browser, I can inject SQL code into that HTTP request. And that SQL code actually passes through the application layer and goes to your database and executes against your database. So an easy example of that is if there's a database called students, and if I type into the browser select star for students, if that goes to your database, it'll send me back all the students. I've essentially exfiltrated all the data from the students table from your database. It's an insidious but very fun exploit. So in this little thing, we're looking at this. It says there's no WAF, which is a web application firewall. It's called error-based SQL in an authenticated page. And for the purposes of our example here, when we look at that, what we know is authenticated page means only people who can log in are going to be in scope as our threat actors. And error-based means it's easy to find. It uses a read-only account for database access. So what that tells us, and this is just for our example here, what that tells us is people can steal the data, but they can't delete the data or modify the data. So when you talk about your CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, availability, what that tells us is confidentiality is the only thing we care about. There's minimal seam, which means there's minimal, for those of you, a lot of you are in forensics, minimal seam means there's going to be very little logging, monitoring, and monitoring and logging. And to the right, it contains encrypted credit card data of 1 million users. So the scope of the impact is credit card data, which has fines and penalties attached, and there's 1 million users. Okay, so that's what we're working with here. And down below, I said, in the real world, an analyst who doesn't understand the technology or business impact wouldn't be part of an assessment. You'll never be asked to assess something you don't understand. So if you don't know SQL injection, just kind of bear with me on this one. So this is a tool. If you want to follow along, if you can scan the QR code, if you trust me, or you can go to that URL, but do follow along, because this is a tool that's going to be very helpful to you. This is an open source tool from OWASP. And you go through and you click the boxes, and you'll get the calculator. So I'm going to bring the calculator up in a moment. But actually, this is not on my desktop. So um, so can you all see that? Yeah, I'm trying to bring it up. Okay, I'm having trouble not, uh, let's see, share. Can someone who knows the screen sharing here give me a hand? I'm trying to share my
Oh,
entire
okay.
screen at this point.
Yeah.
Ah,
Uh,
it should be the calculator. That one there. Cool. Perfect. Oh, perfect. Okay. So what I like about this calculator is it's thorough. When you use most GRC tools, when you graduate, move on, you'll have one part for likelihood and one part for impact, and there's no details. And this one has details. So when I use this, you can see it's divided into two columns. One to the left is the likelihood factors, and to the right are impact factors. So we're going back to likelihood times impact. Then for each of those columns, you've got two cells. You've got threat agent factors, those are people attacking you, and vulnerability factors, and those are your weaknesses. So your likelihood here, which is really straightforward, is the people attacking you, are they better or worse than your vulnerability and your defenses? And the right is impact. And there is your technical impact, meaning how bad is it going to hit your technology? And the right-hand side is how bad will it hit your bank account. And when I do this, I will actually write a paragraph for each. So if I was going to do a risk assessment for one of your companies, this is a calculator that I might use. But if I used it, instead of just giving them the output of this, I would write a paragraph for each one. For skills required, I'd write a paragraph on who the threat actors are, what their skills are. And that point, you get your report. So for skills required, and those who don't know SQL injection, just kind of follow on. But we talked about it being what's called error-based SQL injection, which is really easy. You type in an apostrophe, and if you get an 500 error back, you probably have SQL injection. So I'm going to say it requires, we'll say it requires network and programming skills. Okay, and for motive, we talked about there being 1 million credit card numbers. So is that low reward, possible reward, high reward for the attackers? Probably a high reward. Opportunity. What we remember, it is only people that are authorized who've authenticated users. So it's probably some access and some resources, and population size, we already know, is authenticated users. So did that, even if you didn't follow the specific details, does that kind of make sense to you all? Okay. And then vulnerability factors, ease of discovery. At the bottom is automated tools available. So, those of you who use OWASP Zap or Burp Suite, you can just browse a website and it's going to start telling you those things. So I would say it's automated tools available. Ease of exploit. There, for SQL injection, those of you who use SQL Map, there's definitely automated tools available. Awareness. For me, this is probably something I would say is probably unknown. Hopefully, if it's known, they'd fix it. And then intrusion detection, we said there was minimal SIEM. And I love these questions here because you've got active detection application, you've got logged and reviewed. And if you look at the little numbers there, logged without reviewing it is almost as bad as not being logged. What this says, if you're paying all this money to log your data, your anomalies and not looking at them, that's almost as bad as not logging. So we're going to say log without review. So over here, remember we talked about the CAA triad. Because the account was read-only, confidentiality is full-blown, all data disclosed. We know integrity and availability are not involved. And loss of accountability, it's a authenticated account, but we have no way of knowing it's actually the user. So we're going to say attack possibly traceable. So that makes sense to people? Financial damage. And this, I like this a lot. Damage costs less to fixing the issue is kind of a non-issue. To fix SQL injection is typically one line of code. But here, so the financial damage, if to steal the credit cards, is probably going to be significant if they're stealing credit cards. Reputation damage is going to be a loss of goodwill for credit for sure. Non-compliance is going to be a high-profile violation, and privacy, you've got 1 million people. So But this, you don't have to know why I said those, but you just have to understand the process here. So when we click calculate, what you see here, if you look at the bottom, it says the score is a 6.875 for likelihood, which is high. If you look for impact, it says that the it says it's only a medium. So the overall score, you've got a high and a medium. In this case, it feels it's a medium, which I would challenge that if I was doing the audit, but that's what the calculator says. And it's open source. If you don't like it, you can fix it. So if I were hired to evaluate a SQL injection and I had fairly limited time and limited data, this is what I would be. This is the calculator I'd be using. It's open source. You can modify it, change it. And for everything, every explanation I just gave you why I picked things, I'd put that in a paragraph. So when I'm done, I would take the pen testing report that was given, and I'd make an addendum to my assessment. And the risk assessment I did is this easy. Now, it's easy because I know SQL injection, but for things when you're asked to do a risk assessment on, if you know it, a risk assessment can be this easy. So before I go on, any questions about this risk assessment? Caleb? Yeah.
So kind of like what you're saying is because you have the technical background, at least the foundations of it, and you understand how it can be impacting to the business, you're able to justify and explain your choices for the calculator and
I am.
therefore.
And there will be times in your career that's just not possible. I was asked to review a very complicated, there was actually a command injection in a very sophisticated cloud application. I was nowhere qualified to do it, but nobody was. So what I did is I had the developers join me. So all the developers and the cloud admins join me, and we did this together. So anytime you can do it together, that's better, because what we do is we record who's there and we record consensus. So, for loss of confidentiality, everyone has to agree. If there's 10 people in the room, you get a consensus, because once there's a consensus, it's not Caleb said so, it's the team said so. So you always want to record who you talk to. It's rare you do this in the vacuum. Um, when you work in product security, sometimes you know an application so well, you sort of can do a little bit of that, but you always bring in a multidisciplinary team to help you, the people involved in it, developers and sysadmins ideally.
So it's kind of like leveraging the agile methodologies a little bit, bringing in the whole team, bringing in the stakeholders.
I'm not sure it's agile. It's really more it's getting the best perspective. Um, I'll give an example. Years ago, I was asked. There's a company that had a SQL injection finding, and the application was no longer supported. The developers were fired. The whole thing and it'd be very expensive to fix. They wanted a second opinion, and I said, well, if you've got user input going to your DBMS, don't write me a check. You've got SQL injection. They said, well, we think there's different circumstances. And so I met with them, and the developers explained to me that what they had in place was on the server side, they limited the number of characters to 3. So even though we were getting user input through the DBMS, which by definition is SQL injection, there's no arguing the SQL injection. The likelihood was 100%. The impact was 0, because after meeting with our developers and their other experts, it was all agreed upon that there is no SQL injection payload that can execute with only 3 characters. So if we didn't have the developers involved, we wouldn't have known that. So the more input you can get, the more accurate your assessment is. If you do it, it's always I love that, understanding your business. Any other questions on that? Yep. Okay. Did everyone? Yeah.
So I think you mentioned the 3 characters that look actions. For the first thing that comes to my mind is, like, did you sort of examine the possibility of, like, I don't know what the back end was, so like what did you examine? Is 502 like sort of get around that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A lot of times when you're doing these things, it's very high stakes. if you say it can't be exploited and it gets exploited, it's your reputation on the line. So what we did then is we did a full code review. They had to show us in the code where that was limited, and then we made sure the code was correct. And then we took SQL map and just beat it up for several days with SQL map. And then we did, there's this, the industry just believed there's no SQL injection payload in 3 characters. No, we tried compressing it. There's this, the way it was structured, there's just no way around it. Anybody else? Okay, so in a nutshell, if you're asked to do a risk assessment, you want to use a tool like this. You want to over-explain things. Don't just say skilled required network or programming skill. Say why. Say, we talked to these people. Here's the skills required. Here's, you want to explain everything and put that in your report. And as long as you report, why you thought that, who agreed with you, your rationale, and then reference anything standard, the better off you are. I talked about referencing the CWEs, common weak numeration. Anytime it's just Mike thinks it's bad is one thing, but the federal government thinks it's bad carries a lot more weight than I did. Probably, good or bad, right or wrong, they have more clout. Did everyone, who here was able to actually log into this and kind of follow along? Oh, where'd the QR take you to?
CBS.
I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. Let's go back to the slides. Yeah.
We did have a speaker come earlier this semester to kind of explain how the CVSS calculator works. And
oh, in that case, okay. I was going to go over that, but I can skip that. So you all know how a CVSS calculator works. I will skip that part.
If you missed that meeting, it's largely very similar. You assess kind of what the business has and what the potential vulnerability is, and then you kind of plug in, and then it spits out a number.
By show of hands, who here hasn't seen a CVSS calculator? Okay, let's take a few minutes just to do that. That means I have to figure out how to go back there. A CVSS calculator is a really, really helpful tool. So the CVSS scoring system is actually just a bunch of, there's a lot of different calculators, just a bunch of XML. And they're all the exact same questions, the exact same values. If you look at this, like where it says attack vector, that's a variable called AV that'll be in any calculator you use, the variable will be AV. And then the value of AV here for network is N, for adjacent network is A, and so on. So when you get your findings, it's actually give you a string of characters. You can take those characters and paste into any calculator tool, and it'll bring this back up again, which is a kind of a nice feature. Another thing about the calculator is in my mind, it's not intuitive at all. So if I were to ask the group here, so for what we just talked about, our example, is it network adjacent, local, or physical? There may not be a universal agreement, right? But if you hover your mouse over this, you'll see it pops up. And even then, it's not totally intuitive. But for SQL injection, we'll say it's network. Attack complexity, that's a little bit easier. Privileges required, low, none, low, high is very subjective, right? What is low access mean? Is that or high access? So if you hover over it, it can be a little bit more specific. So you just go through and you select these. And when you're done, I'm just going to click these at random for you because and you can also see some crossover here. You can see our CIA triad. There's the impact to confidentiality, impact to integrity, impact to availability. Any good calculator, whether you're using the risk matrix, CBS, they'll always put it in that thing. So what you have here, when we're done, where's my number? Okay, there we go. Okay, so there's our number. Thank you for that. And if you look over here, the score is a 4.3. And if you Google CVSS scores, Google actually just pops up the answer. And if you look down here, right above the big blue bar, you see that string? You can take that string and copy and paste that into any CVSS calculator, and it repeats the results. So when you write up your assessment, it's always nice to include that, because if you click that, it'll bring it up. So it's hyperlink. So I won't, if you've already had a class on this, I won't go into it, but this is really important. If you go back to my slides, remember, one of the things that the pen testers gave in their report was a CVSS score. Typically with a CVSS score, there's not much negotiation. You can kind of challenge their assumptions because they're a little bit subjective, but there's really not a lot of wiggle room. If a competent analyst says you're a 3.1, you're probably a 3.1. Let me go back to my slides. Are you okay? You did that again. Okay. So, and this is my way of saying there's no right or wrong answer. You're a product manager, right? Your job is to make sure your product meets your customers' needs. You've been told the product is late because of a security problem, and you have to tell your customers what's the best answer for you. Now, going and telling your customers we're burning you, not giving you what you need on time because it's going to cost us money is probably not the best answer here, right? For your CEO, that's a great answer. If your customers probably not. For your product manager, they probably care more about a risk matrix. They might care a little bit more about your CVSS scores, right? So if you're a director of software development and you're told you have to redo this work, right? How do you want to understand that? You probably don't care about the risk matrix. You probably care a lot about your CVSS scores, and hopefully you care a lot about what it's going to cost your company. So these are just my way of saying there is no best model. You tailor your model for who you are. And I put together this little table. So your risk matrix is really best for fast triaging. Sometime in your career, they're gonna scan your network and say we found 1,000 high vulnerabilities, right? Go triage. You can't do a risk assessment on 1,000 findings, so you're going to have to do the best you can with risk times impact or probability times impact. For doing it fast, it's very helpful. When you don't have a lot of data, it's very helpful, but it does lack specific details and it's prone to bias. Your CVSS scores are really good for a specific software vulnerability or infrastructure vulnerability in a very heterogeneous environment, and when it's too broad to really use a quantification, but it doesn't always extrapolate to broader scenarios. And then cyber risk quantification, the FAIR method that I really suggest you Google. If you have a lot of data on things like your attackers, the attack process, how often they hit you, you got a lot of logs and access to your analysts, that's phenomenal. It requires a lot of data. There's a high learning curve and it requires specialized tools. And we're almost done. We're actually ahead of schedule, but this is what I taught. when I talk to clients, I have clients everywhere from software development teams to boards of directors or in between, and they don't want the same thing. You want to tailor your report to who your client is. So if you're talking to very technical people, if you're talking to your software developers, they care a lot about the technical details. They care a lot about how to fix it, right? If you're talking to your security team, hopefully they care about everything. If you're talking to the manager, they want to know how to fix it. And the compliance concerns are we going to jail, right? Are we going to be fined? Are we going to be in the newspapers? So your managers will, the manager level will care a lot about, how to fix it, how much does it cost to fix it? Are we going to jail? What will it impact my stock price? Your compliance officers, people like, your data compliance, your privacy officers, they're going to care a lot about compliance concerns, a lot about financial impact, and they probably don't care a lot about how to fix it. They might, and that's great. Your chief counsel, your legal office, same thing, how to fix it, what's it cost. Your CEO and board of directors, they want to know, are we going to jail? Is it impacting our stock price? So the reason I put this grid here is it's not one size fits all. You always meet your clients where they at, you give them what they need, and you can write the greatest technical report in the world, and your CEO probably won't care. Or you can write the greatest financial impact report in the world, and your developers probably don't care. You always have to meet your clients where they're at with what they need. So kind of in closing, I jammed a full semester with the content here in 1 hour. I put a fire hose in your mouth. If you're feeling a little lost, that's okay. I didn't mean to overwhelm you. This was really meant to kind of expose you to what risk assessments are. And if you want deep dives, please reach out. I'm happy to talk about deep dives. I encourage all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. Every year at the end of the year, I review anywhere between 10 and 50 resumes from college students that are graduating. I'm very happy to look at your resume and give you feedback. There's no problem. Other thing I can do is if you're a Cal Poly student looking for a job and there's a company you're applying at and someone at that company knows me, use me as a reference. Say, Mike, I braved the rain. I skipped lunch, braved the rain, and came to see you on October 14th that time, and I will very happily reach on your behalf. My website doesn't exist yet. That's a shameless plug. My new company is RiskView 360, where we're making basically what TurboTax is for risk. We're making that. So please connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help you. If you want help with your resume at the end of the, anytime between now and the end of the year, feel free to send it to me. Honestly, I do between 10 and 50 every year, and it's an absolute joy. So there's no problem there. And that said, we're a little bit early, so I'm happy to take any questions on risk assessments, any topic you want on security, I'm happy to talk about.
Just wanted to be asked from the benefits of what you explained about risk assessment, how would you recommend indirectly, even if you were working at different parts within cyber, that you indirectly are risk assessing in your capacity?
Well, hopefully you are, right? But that's an important question. But if you go into cyber, there's always two camps. There's the risk camp and the compliance camp. And the compliance camp is very rule driven. HIPAA says you have to. PCI says you have to. They don't care what the risk is, right? When an auditor comes and audits you to make sure you're HIPAA compliant, they don't care if it's a risk or not. They want you to check the boxes, and you can claim biased, right? I think a check the box exercise is pointless. Then there's the risk camp, and the risk camp is making decisions based on what bad thing could happen, how likely is it to happen, how much does it cost to fix it. So coming from Cal Poly, I already know a lot of you are kind of risk oriented anyway. If we went to a different campus, a lot of them are more compliance focused. I'm a better fit for Cal Poly, as you probably noticed, but there will always be that. And early in my career, I always fought auditors. I always fought the audits. But let me give you a fun example. I was a CISO of a company, and they brought in an auditor who was worthless, just writing me up for everything, didn't know jack. And at the end of the day, all he found was I was using an outdated form. So during the executive briefing, he's telling my CEO, Mike's using the outdated form, right? I'm trying not to roll my eyes and flip them off. But my team starts texting me and I'm like, hey, leave me alone. I'm getting my rent kicked. Mike, we have a data exfil situation. All our data is being, we're actively capturing unencrypted passwords, leaving the network. And holy smokes. And what this jackass, pardon me, what this gentleman did was, in spite of us telling him not to, he took his corporate laptop, plugged it into our network, and his laptop was set up to automatically back up his data through a sync. Anytime it was what's called an occasionally connected application. So as soon as it connected, it started syncing. Well, they set up their backup system not to encrypt. So this guy that was writing me up for using outdated form, every data, all the data on his laptop is now going into my SOC. I own all of his data. And I'm cool about it. And I say, I turned it off, we're deleting it. We told you not to plug in, you did anyway. And I said, you really need to encrypt your backups. And his response was, our backup process meets the policy, which was 100% true. I couldn't argue that. And I said, you know what? Let me talk to your CISO about that. So I called the CISO who worked for this very compliance-based company, and he said, well, we're meeting compliance, we're meeting our requirements. And I said, okay, I now know your password. So there are, I'm broadcasting my bias kind of loud and clear here. But that said, there's a couple things that came out during that exercise. And one of them, I had team members who had access to my SOC data that shouldn't have had it, right? So after it was done and I congratulated them, I said, hey, how did you get that data? And they said, oh, we used the account. And I said, what account? And they'd set up a generic account where everyone had the password, no multi-factor authentication. So as one user, or one account name to multiple users, zero traceability. And I thought, which is a huge, huge issue, right? And I went back, so the next time there was an audit, I went to the auditor and I was very different. And I said, I need you to really focus on, these are called what are called generic service accounts. I said, I need you to focus on generic service accounts. This is before the cool Azure tools existed. So I started, in my career, what I started doing was, I started embracing the compliance people, because even though I'm very risk oriented, you can only assess the risk of what you know about. If you don't know about it, if you've got a blind spot to it, you can't assess the risk. So as I kind of matured in my career, I started embracing both sides. That said, you heard my bias. That was a very long-winded answer, but yeah, coming from Cal Poly, you'll probably all take roles in risk-focused areas. Any other questions?
You mentioned earlier that when you're talking about like SQL injection, like and anyone will have like sort of an area that they're like focused on. They have like some mastery of. Are there areas of risk that a lot of people tend to not focus on in terms of like studying?
The boring stuff. Honestly, most of you are going to be you're from Cal Poly. You're going to be focused on the sexy, fun stuff, right? Very few of you want to go and say, I want to go and look at well, actually, you guys are friends of people, but things like account management. It's a huge risk for most organizations. And most pen testers don't want to do the tedious work of looking at account management. They want to go pop shells. They want to crack things. So generally speaking, in my career, you've got the cutting edge people chasing the cutting edge stuff, and we desperately need competent people doing boring stuff too. Did that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions about risk or anything else?
I'm conducting assessment for my auditing client.
Oh, cool.
For my client's business is evaluating state, and so I'm kind of, I would like your advice on whether I should choose COVID or against
That's so.
TC, or should I? Because like you said, there's both the risk and compliance part, and so we're not going to find which there's regulations that this business needs to be compliant for, but I'm kind of struggling on should I follow COVID or mix?
That's a great question. So the question he's asking is, he's doing a risk assessment as part of an audit. And there's different audit frameworks, and those audit frameworks will float on the type of risk assessments you use. Some will have very specific requirements. The answer is, I don't know what the travel industry requires. Sometimes they require a specific type of risk assessment. If it doesn't matter, if the client doesn't care what type you use, you as a student learning how to do the NIST is called the 830 risk assessment. Yeah, that's super valuable in your career. If putting that on your resume when you graduate is super helpful. So selfishly, if nothing else mattered, I would if I can get I did an 830 risk assessment on my resume as a graduating senior, I'd do that. That said, you always want to make sure you know what the industry requires. So if you were to Google, if they said we want you to do a risk assessment on our credit card process, at that point you're doing the PCI. At that point you're constraining the PCI, right? If they, so you want to know what it depends on what you're assessing, what the laws say you have to assess. But just generally speaking, if they don't care and it's just sort of a student exercise, I would get 830 on my resume because that flows into what's called CMMC, which if you work for any kind of federal job or a program funded by federal money, that's the requirement. So anytime you can get a requirement on your resume, that's cool. Oh, no. So, right. So CMMC requires in this stuff. So that's all. Yeah. Government entities and people who get a bunch of money from the government. Yes.
Ready.
Yeah.
We are running a little short on time. I believe the next class starts at 1.
Oh.
So, any closing remarks or?
Yeah. For those of you who braved the rain to come in here, thank you so much. Feel free to reach out. I love speaking at Cal Poly. I actually flew in from Sacramento just for this in the rain and government shutdown. It was worth every minute of it. So thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate you guys having me here. And I will see you for ITC.
Would you be available for questions afterwards?
Yeah, but I don't want to interrupt the classroom, but sure.
All right.
I'm happy to meet out somewhere else.
Yeah. So please take advantage while he's here. Ask him more questions. Sorry to interrupt the question sessions, but yeah.
Definitely do that. Thank you again for all those who came out in person. This is actually, I'm really happy with how many people showed up despite the rain. So, yeah. Thank you again. We will be closing the meeting now. Thank you for those who came online as well.
If you guys just want to stay about 2 minutes, right now we're going to bring up the sign-in sheet that you guys can use to sign into the meeting real quick.
Oh, we did do that. Okay. Oh, yes. Please, again, that was our mistake, but we do need people to sign in so that we can tell ASI how many people we have at our meetings and advocate for more funding. So please, if you can take a moment, just scan that QR code on your way out. Thank you. Oh, yeah, and pizza.